Good evening and welcome to this very special edition of the NDTV Dialogues, where our guest is Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Well, he is the new Vice Chairman of the government's main think tank, the NITI Aayog, and of course joins us in a week of GDP figures out, disappointing ones, and demonetization figures also out. Dr. Kumar, thanks very much for joining us. And you're literally going to be in the hot seat now from this week onwards. Are you looking forward to it?
And in the very deep end.
Yes.
So, yes, I'm very much looking forward to it. As an economist, this is in some sense a dream job, and I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for giving me this opportunity at a time when the economy is at the cusp of either taking off in a very different high trajectory, which it has all the potential to do, and if we do the right things, of course. And this is the coming period could well be a defining moment in the economic history of India, because we could have an economy which has macroeconomic stability and high growth potential, which it will finally exploit, as it were, and get there. So and a lot of structural changes having been taken already. There are some challenges, of course. But it is a historical time, as it were.
It's interesting you say that, because as we speak, the latest GDP quarter figures are just out, and they're very disappointing. They're 5.7%. They're actually the lowest under since the Modi government has come into power. What would you say about these GDP figures, especially the contraction also in 8 core sectors?
Yes, it's one. I think I must admit that I didn't expect this, and I think therefore to that extent I'll have to look deeper into it to see where the contraction has been. For example, I had thought that the mining sector was doing well because the coal output was up, etc., but clearly not. And also, the manufacturing sector, the growth rate has been very disappointing, but that's because of a very high base in the previous quarter. It grew at about 10%, when we know that manufacturing demand has not been that high and there are excess capacities in the system and so on. But this is one, I would like to say, Sonia, which is that any attempt to link it to demonetization is completely spurious. Because remonetization, it started well.
I haven't done that yet. No.
I know, but I'm preempting you to that extent, because the opposition is already at it in some sense. Remonetization, it started in January already, so that effect should have worn out between April to June. And the second thing that I do want to say is that this figure shows two things. One, that maybe the conspicuous consumption and the excess consumption that we've had in this economy, ours is a consumption driven economy, has probably slowed down and now accounts for a lower percentage of GDP. And two, that the twin balance sheet problems have actually had their impact, which is that the corporates are not investing and the banks are very reluctant to give credit because of their own balance sheets being in very bad shape.
Well, just looking at the reasons, you said that you don't see this link to demonetization at all. It's the opposition already blaming it in a way. But doesn't that make it worse if it's not linked to demonetization? Because then there are other core issues. Demonetization can be an easy answer. We did this and we'll see low growth and then it will become better. It's actually worse if you don't link it to demonetization.
You're right in some sense, and therefore there are some deeper structural issues to be looked into, and I'm sure the government is doing that, and everybody in the government is trying to grapple with it. For example, in the agricultural sector, we know that agriculture now needs a revamping, modernization, bringing it into a scientific technology sort of basis, etc. But at the same time, one must recognize what the chief statistician of India said, that there are statistical factors which have explained this. He's talked about the WPI deflator, which was negative last quarter and has become positive. Now that can make a huge swing in the figures. So these are statistical aberrations, as I mentioned the manufacturing sector as well. So which we should not overlook those, and we should not think of a 1 quarter number indicating a trend. Because what you might get in the second quarter is quite different.
No, but of course, what makes it, in a sense, a more an area of concern is that India is the bright spot in the world's economy. But we know that China came out with surprisingly strong GDP figures recently of 6.9%. You've talked often of what India should do vis-a-vis China and growth. And also now, as new head of NITI Aayog, what would you recommend to the government? You said you're sure the government is looking into it, but as the head of the main think tank now, what would be your suggestions to the government?
Well, it's very clearly very premature for me to say anything at this point of time, because I have been an outsider for a long time. So I'm sure once I get in and I get all the information that I do, I'll have to make up my mind at that time. But what is very clear is that one, domestic investment needs to be given a fillip. The credit offtake by industry has become negative. So two, the financial sector, that problem has to be taken, my view, taken by the horns. I mean, just addressed frontally. I think we can't tarry with it any longer. So we need to do that. And third, I think the government may have to look at very seriously at some radical means, if you like, for expanding employment. But if you expand, like for example, the Mudra program, which is given out, I believe, something like 6 crore loans, under the scheme. We need to review that to see what is the impact on employment on that has been. So I think what we need to do at this point of time is to take a review, a very honest review of all the schemes that have been launched, and I think that is also NITI's mandate, to see and to review them with a almost single criteria of impact on employment.
Jobs is the main focus, and just linked to that, because demonetization and of course those figures which came out again this week, what a shocker for many, because 99% of demonetized cash is actually back into the system. You were an early supporter of demonetization as an outsider. You gave Prime Minister Modi thumbs up. You said this proves that it really does work against black money. Do you still stand by that, given the fact that now, as the opposition, Mr. Chidambaram has said, that black money is now virtually white?
I wish Mr. Chidambaram, who had been an old-time friend, hadn't said that. Because this just displays a lot of bias. Because he would know, I'm sure, that there is about 3 lakh crore now caught in dubious accounts, about 18 lakh dubious accounts, which is firmly in the foresight of the government's tax department. So to say that all of this has become white is just not fair. And his further statement that this was done for particular kith and kin is of course not even worse, because if 99% is back, then his kith and my kin have all benefited from that. So it's not, that's just a very incorrect statement to make, and I wish he hadn't made that. But what I am still a supporter of demonetization, because for the first time in my life, somebody had the courage to say enough is enough, and I will drain this swamp of illegal incomes, because if I don't drain it, then this will become the norm, and this had become the norm. Nobody was going to question ever anybody with illegal incomes, and and they were all strutting around. So draining the swamp, attacking the stock of demonetization, which they have done successfully. All that informal money is now formal. It is tethered to these bank accounts, and now the shoe is firmly on the foot of the tax department to get on with it.
But Mr. Kumar, as you yourself have said, that this also became about the whole Indian jugaad system, because when you talk about the tax department looking into it, now we'll see what happens eventually. The point is that people use this, and it was again the rich and powerful who managed to use this to convert so-called black money into white through various accounts. I think you mentioned also that you knew many people use Jan Dhan accounts, and that money is now all white. So how can you say it combated black money?
One, it's not white. This is what the burden of my song is, that it is best grey and is not white. So and therefore, because it's grey, it's now possible to get at it. That's the first point. And two, yes, of course, we are ingenious people. We have gamed the system, but that also is a reflection on how bad the system had become over the last 60 years. In the sense that all our institutions and all our practices have been so rife with corruption that it was so easy for the rich and the corrupt to get on and game the system and game it successfully. Now, this should be a cause of every citizen's worry, and I think this is where the demonetization has shown that this government is probably committed, and this is why I have supported it, to as it were to change it lock, stock and barrel. And I'm happy that at least now going forward, you would not get this cronyism and this corruption and this whole thing about doesn't matter how you become rich, it's just a matter that you have become rich, which will for the first time create the right incentive structure for the young people to work hard and honestly and expect to get on with it. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I do, and in fact, I'm going to ask them to perhaps react to that. And what are the questions you would like to ask on demonetization to Mr. Kumar, given the new figures that are just out? Any questions? Go ahead.
So we all know that RBI has ruled in a statement that 99% of the black scrap money is back in the system, and P. Chidambaram sir saying that it's all bogus. What do you have to say? Means, what is your personal view on that? Is it really bogus?
It's entirely untrue that this is bogus, and I wish Mr. Chidambaram hadn't made this point, simply because if the government, see, what was the alternative? The alternative was that you had found illegal money being burnt in bonfires and being thrown in drains and floating down the Ganges. Now, if that had happened, and from the very beginning the government had given enough time, because the government could have just said 1 week and no more if they were serious about it, right? But they had given enough time, for people to put them, to come back with their sort of, the sort of demonetized currency notes. They had also given a whole scheme, which was the Pradhan Mantri Krishi Yojana or something, where they could have deposited the money. They also knew very well that by having declared that 2.5 lakh deposits will not stand scrutiny, that that this could have happened. So, the government's intention was to confiscate black money, but not in a manner that would disrupt the entire economy. I assure you that if that confiscatory nature, the expropriatory nature like this done by Stalin, for rich, for the rich farmers, or Mao by others, if that had been taken in this country, there would have been a social uprising. It would not have been possible. So, I think given the country that we are, given what we have had, this was the best way to attack the whole process, the symbolic nature of the corrupt economy, and that's been done.
But Dr. Kumar, in a sense, is this become all about changing the goalposts? Now we say in a symbolic nature, but the fact remains that you just talked so passionately about jobs. The impact on jobs, and that in the informal sector, again, the CMIE has said that about 1.5 million jobs, they estimate, have been lost. You say that the GDP slowdown may not have been because of demonetization, but there's no denying that there has been an impact which is still not clear.
Yeah. But
does a symbolic nature then justify this?
Let me explain the kind of impact.
Yes.
We know, and we are all Delhi walas, that in Delhi, real estate, housing, you had to pay up to 60–70% in black money, in cash incomes, right? Now that's gone. That of course means that the speculative demand for real estate, for housing, is now kaput, is gone. So therefore, the real estate prices are down, the real estate activity is down. That's of course meant loss of jobs. Now the question is, what do you want to do? Do you want to carry on with the previous system, or do you want to clean up the Augean stables and say that henceforth you will be on a better footing, where the housing sector would be for the end user and not for everybody trying to launder money and being speculative about it. And this can be explained in many other sectors as well, where the loss of cash and the loss of informal demand, as it were, has brought the activity down and resulted in. So, it's a historical truth that everywhere that you have attempted governance reforms, there have been some pains. But those pains, and I think I heard that by somebody queuing up in the demonetization days, he says, आगे बढ़ने के लिए कई बार पीछे 3-4 कदम लेना पड़ते हैं. So I'm not changing the goalposts, right? But the point is that if people will tell me the Prime Minister said on the 8th of November, that we'll confiscate 4 lakh, or, it had to be said to, in some sense, undertake the measure. But having undertaken the measure, the way it's turned out to be, I think, has been the least disruptive, and yet produced the results of curbing the flow and stock of black money.